Imagine standing in a freezing, muddy trench. You cannot see the enemy yet, but you can feel them. The ground beneath your boots is physically shaking. The air is growing thick with the acrid smell of burning diesel fuel and exhaust. Coming towards you is not just a standard infantry patrol. It is the mechanized spearhead of a massive elite armored division. Dozens of steel behemoths backed by heavily armed motorized infantry, designed with one single purpose: to punch a massive hole through entire armies. And standing in their way? Just one single, under-equipped, exhausted platoon. A handful of men holding a seemingly insignificant piece of high ground. By all conventional military logic, these men should have been wiped off the map in a matter of minutes. The sheer weight of armor, the overwhelming firepower, and the unstoppable momentum were entirely against them. An infantryman standing against a heavy tank is the ultimate mismatch. The tank brings heavy armor, high explosive shells, and coaxial machine guns. The infantryman brings a rifle and a shovel. But they were not wiped out. Instead, what happened on this small, muddy slope became an absolute masterclass in defensive warfare. Today, we are going to break down exactly how a tiny fraction of infantrymen defied the impossible odds. We will not just look at the weapons they fired, we are going to look at the exact geometry of survival. We are going to show you how freezing mud, elevation, and a brilliant tactical setup turned this quiet ridge into a total slaughterhouse for enemy armor. This is Echoes of War, and this is the Ridge of Defiance. To truly understand this tactical miracle, we first have to examine the chessboard. During a highly critical phase of a massive winter offensive, an enemy armored column was pushing aggressively through the sector. Their ultimate objective was to secure a vital network of crossroads located just a short distance behind our isolated platoon. Those crossroads were the absolute key to the region. If the armored spearhead takes that intersection, they sever the supply lines, and the entire regional front line collapses. The stakes could not have been higher. The defenders holding the line were completely outmatched. They were just a small infantry unit left behind to slow the advance. Their arsenal consisted of standard-issue rifles, a few submachine guns for close quarters, limited mortar support, and, crucially, a couple of light, towed anti-tank guns. Let us be clear about these anti-tank guns. Against the thick frontal armor of a heavy enemy battle tank, these light cannons were practically useless. Firing at the front plate of an advancing heavy tank with a light gun is like throwing rocks at a steel vault door. The shells would simply bounce off or shatter on impact. So, if you cannot win the armor penetration game, how do you survive? You use the earth itself as your primary weapon. Look closely at the topography of this specific ridge. It is not just a random hill, it is a natural geographical funnel. To the left side of the approach, there is a dense, deeply packed thicket of woods. The trees are too close together, and the root systems are too thick for heavy armor to push through without throwing a track. To the right side, there is a steep, marshy drop-off. The ground there is totally unstable and completely unsuitable for heavy tracked vehicles. This specific geographical layout left the enemy armored commander with only one viable approach: straight up the middle. They had to use a narrow, ascending dirt road that recent storms had heavily churned into thick, freezing, slippery mud. The platoon commander in charge of the defense recognized this terrain bottleneck immediately. He knew that if he positioned his men at the very front crest of the ridge, they would be spotted instantly and blasted to pieces by the tank's superior range. Instead of taking the bait, he deployed a classic yet highly dangerous strategy: a reverse slope defense. A reverse slope defense is a psychological and tactical nightmare for any attacking force. By placing his men and his guns on the backside of the ridge, the platoon commander completely negated the tank's main advantage, which is their devastating long-range firepower. Think about the physics of an advancing tank. As the armor pushes up the incline of the hill, the chassis angles upward. Their heavy main guns would be pointing helplessly at the sky.
They could not depress their barrels enough to hit anything, and more importantly, they could not see what was waiting for them until they fully crested the hill. And by the time their heavy steel tracks cleared the crest, they would be within point-blank killing range. The defenders spent the agonizing hours before the attack digging in. The light anti-tank guns were dug deep into the frozen earth. They were camouflaged heavily with cut branches, dirt, and snow, rendering them virtually invisible from a distance. More importantly, they were positioned in a deadly crossfire layout. The gunners were given strict, terrifying orders. Do not fire at the front of the tanks. Do not fire when you see the first vehicle. You must wait for them to expose their soft underbelly, the much thinner side and rear armor.
And so the men waited. The low rumbling in the distance slowly grew to a deafening, terrifying roar. Thick plumes of gray exhaust fumes began to drift over the crest of the hill. The ground vibrated so violently that the loose dirt began to crumble off the walls of the defensive foxholes. But the tanks did not come first. Doctrine dictates that armor rarely advances blindly. First came the enemy infantry scouts, moving cautiously up the muddy road, probing for weaknesses. This was the first ultimate test of discipline for the defenders. If a single nervous soldier fired his rifle at the scouts, the element of surprise would be completely lost. The tanks would halt, call in artillery, and obliterate the ridge. But the defenders held their nerve. They stayed completely silent, hidden in the freezing mud, letting the scouts report back that the road ahead seemed clear. Confident that the ridge was abandoned, the armored commander signaled the main column to advance. The first heavy tank slowly crests the hill. Its massive silhouette blocks out the pale winter sky. The enemy tank commander is exposed in the top cupola, scanning the horizon for targets. He looks down the reverse slope and sees nothing but empty snow, shattered trees, and mud. Confident in his supremacy, he orders the driver to roll forward. As the lead tank pushes over the crest and begins to angle downward, it fully exposes its highly vulnerable side armor to the hidden anti-tank gun waiting patiently on the right flank. The defending platoon commander waits. The tension is unbearable. He waits until the tank is perfectly positioned in the kill zone, and then, finally, gives the order. A direct hit. The muzzle flash tears through the winter air. The armor-piercing shell slams violently into the side of the lead tank, striking just above the track wheels where the armor is finished. The massive vehicle violently shudders as the internal ammunition detonates. Thick black smoke and fire immediately pour from the engine deck and the hatches. The behemoth grinds to a sudden, catastrophic halt, its burning carcass completely blocking the narrow dirt road. Panic immediately ensues within the enemy ranks. The element of surprise is absolute and devastating. The second tank in the armored column, desperate to avoid the burning wreck blocking its path, tries to veer hard off the road to bypass the obstacle. But remember the topography? The moment its heavy steel tracks leave the compacted dirt of the main path, 50 tons of steel sink instantly and deeply into the freezing, treacherous mud of the ravine. The engine roars, the tracks spin wildly, but the tank is completely bogged down. It has become a static, heavily armored pillbox, entirely unable to maneuver. This is the fatal bottleneck. The trap has beautifully and violently snapped shut. The only road is blocked by a burning wreck, and the flanks are completely impassable. The mighty armored spearhead, once an unstoppable force of nature, is suddenly reduced to a chaotic traffic jam. Now the rest of the defending infantrymen open up. Machine gun fire sweeps the entirely exposed area, creating a wall of lead that prevents the enemy motorized infantry from dismounting their transport vehicles to clear the anti-tank positions. Light mortar shells begin dropping directly into the tightly clustered enemy formation. It is chaotic, brutal, and brilliantly orchestrated by the defenders.
For hours, this intense micro-battle raged on the slope. The attackers, desperate to break the stalemate, threw wave after wave of dismounted infantry, attempting to flank the ridge through the trees. But the tight, unforgiving geometry of the battlefield meant they were constantly forced into pre-sighted kill zones. The machine gunners knew exactly where the enemy had to walk.
The remaining tanks, trapped helplessly behind the burning lead vehicles, could not bring their heavy guns to bear. Every single time a brave or foolish tank driver tried to push the burning wrecks out of the way to clear a path, he exposed the side of his vehicle to the remaining, heavily concealed anti-tank guns. The battlefield turned into a graveyard of steel. By nightfall, the absolute impossible had been achieved. The elite armored spearhead, heavily battered, completely demoralized, and entirely unable to crack this tiny, mathematically perfect defensive perimeter, was forced to call off the attack and withdraw. They reversed back down the muddy hill, leaving behind a smoking trail of destroyed and abandoned tanks, alongside dozens of casualties. A tiny handful of men. That is all it took to stop a juggernaut. These defenders did not win because they had better weapons. They certainly did not win because they had heavier armor or air support. They won through superior situational awareness and unbreakable discipline. They read the terrain like a master reads a chessboard. They understood the fundamental truth of combat. In war, geography dictates the absolute terms of engagement. By using the ridge as an impenetrable shield and the freezing mud as an inescapable trap, David did not just survive Goliath, he systematically broke his knees. History books and documentaries often focus on the massive, sweeping arrows drawn on a commanding general's map. They talk about army groups and grand strategy. But the reality of war is much darker and much more personal. Wars are fought, decided, and won in the freezing mud, in the dark ravines, and on the lonely, blood-soaked ridges by small, isolated groups of men who simply refuse to break. If you want to see more deep-dive tactical analyses of history's most incredible micro-battles and last stands, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What legendary small unit action or defensive stand should we analyze next? Let us know down in the comments section below. Until next time, this is Echoes of War. Stay tactical.